Fee 308. Study Session 7. Carl J. Hempel's Nomological Model of Scientific Explanation. Introduction. The prevailing assumption from time immemorial is that science can solve most, if not all, of human problems. In the history of science, therefore, attempts have been made towards preferring an adequate, effective, and sustainable explanation of each seeming phenomena and objects of the study, usually with the aid of explanatory models. In this lecture, we shall be looking at one of such models developed by Carl Gustav Hempel. We shall examine the basic assumptions, merits, as well as demerits of the model. Learning outcome. At the end of this lecture, you will be able to explain Carl G. Hempel's deductive nomological model of scientific explanation. What is a model? A model refers to a certain array of conditions that form a template such that when some things satisfy these conditions and fit the template, it becomes a standard for explaining phenomena or solving problems in a given area. In earlier literatures, a theory can be called a model of another theory, and can contain an interpretation of it, insofar as the sets of objects which they study are models of the same axiom system, when taken in the way in which they are studied. Hence, a scientific model is normally a theory intended to explain a given realm of phenomena, or a theory by replacing its terms with more perspicuous ones. Braithwaite, 1953, page 89. Hempel's model of scientific explanation. Hempel is the foremost champion of the formalist thesis, a position we explained earlier as holding the view that scientific theories and explanations must fit into a definite logical structure in the form of covering law models. In his Aspect of Scientific Explanation and Other Essays in Philosophy of Science, published in 1965, Hempel explains that all scientific explanations have certain common logical qualities which qualify them to form a model of explanation. Carl G. Hempel designed what he called a deductive nomological model of explanation to show that for any explanation to constitute a scientific law, it must contain certain law-like universal statements which must be related to and constitute a sufficient explanation of the events to be explained. The word nomological or nomology is derived from the word nomos, closely connected with the Greek word physis, which means nature. Technically put, it simply connotes regularity in nature. Therefore, a statement is nomological when it resembles a law-like generalization, unlike an accidental generalization and a counterfactual force. For example, all rocks in my garden are humus is a statement of accidental generalization, for each generality is restrictive to the rocks in my garden alone and does not state what must be the case. Nomological statements, however, are law-like generalizations about what must be the case or state of affairs. For example, the statement all specimens of uranium have a melting point of 1.063 degrees centigrade must remain true even if no further specimen of gold is subjected to the required temperature. Thus, for Ernest Nagel, a nomological statement must satisfy two conditions. It must deductively entail or be entailed deductively by other laws, and its scope of prediction must exceed the known evidence for it. Nagel, 1961. The deductive nomological model of Hempel is meant to explain that a typical scientific explanation is a sort of deductive argument whose explanatory import lies in showing that the phenomenon being described in the explanandum was expected or could have been predicted in view of the subsets of statements contained in the explanans. Of 1999, 159. A model formulation of the deductive nomological model of scientific explanation, as designed by Hempel, is here presented in the following schema. L1, L2, L3, Ln. Statement of antecedents. Conditions, general laws, that is, explanans. C1, C2, C3, CR. Causal statements. Observed phenomenon to be explained. Explanandum. In the above schema, premise 1 and premise 2 constitute the explanans of the argument, whereas statement E represent the explanandum. This explanatory model has a predictive function by showing that the explanandum is inferable from the explanans. Thus, we can predict that if similar antecedent conditions described in the explanans should prevail in the near future, then a phenomenon of the same sort described in the explanandums would occur. Given that, the general law cited in the explanans still holds. According to Hempel, for it to constitute a scientific explanation, there must be a set of laws-like statements, such as L1, L2, Ln, which are understood as universal statements of the kind that whenever events of the kind described by C1, C2, and C3 take place, events of the kind described by E must of necessity take place. First, in the explanation, therefore, you have a given fact, that is, what is to be explained. Then you have two sets of statements. For these statements to constitute an explanation of the event, the E statement must be deducible from the L and C statements and not from either set alone, and the L and C statements must also be true. Hempel gives additional requirements which a scientific explanation must meet. First is that it must meet the requirement of what he calls explanatory relevance. By this, he means that the statements laying down the laws, law-like premises, and initial conditions should entail the conclusion. In other words, there must be a logical connection between the set of statements or propositions that are used to explain, that is, the explanans, and the statement that is being explained, the explanandum. The second requirement a scientific explanation must meet is that of testability. By this requirement, Hempel means that the premises, that is, the explanans, of the model should be such that are empirically testable. In other words, if one makes a metaphysical claim about the world, or if one's law-like statements are of the metaphysical kind, they do not, according to Hempel, constitute an acceptable scientific explanation. In the same way, when the explanans comprise of analytic claims which have no extra linguistic context, the explanation cannot be said to constitute an acceptable scientific explanation. These two special requirements are, according to Hempel, necessary to have an acceptable scientific explanation. This is not, however, to say that we cannot have an explanation without the two requirements, but such would definitely not be a scientific explanation. However, even when the two conditions listed above are met, a proper scientific explanation still has to show that the L and C statements within the explanans are causally related to the E statement. All scientific explanations must be shown to be causal explanations. A causal explanation is one which specifies a necessary and sufficient condition for a certain event to occur. Now, supposing a man is stabbed and he dies, one would ordinarily say that stabbing is the cause of the man's death. The question now is whether stabbing is a necessary and sufficient condition for a man's death. Obviously, stabbing is not a necessary condition for a man's death, since men die in some other ways without being stabbed. In the same vein, stabbing cannot even be said to be a sufficient condition for death, since a man may be stabbed and yet may not die. An explanation of the type, therefore, that tends to establish a causal link between stabbing a person and the person's eventual death will turn out to be a satisfactory scientific explanation. The conclusion to be drawn from the above example is that a necessary and sufficient condition must be conjoined for given statement within the explanans in order to give an acceptable explanation of event E. The problem with Hempel's model. Many scholars have identified several flaws in the covering laws approach which Hempel adopted in this model. Hempel's explanatory model, it is argued, is fallible because it is possible for the explanans not to explain the explanandum, even when the premises of the proposed explanation are true. Bird, 1998-73. Again, Hempel's model is based on general laws which serve as covering laws, that is, the explanans, with which the antecedent condition explanandum is explained. These general laws themselves are products of inductive generalizations which proceed from a premise about a sample to a conclusion about a population. This tends to bring to back the entire problem of induction with all its associated flaws. Another problem associated with Hempel's model of explanation is that it cannot adequately account for social facts deductively, especially in the social sciences where explanation appeals to reason, motives, and desires. In other words, Hempel's deductive nomological model of explanation only seeks to unpack the causes of events as obtained in the physical sciences, but human actions that are triggered off by reason, motives, or desires are left unaccounted for by Hempel's model. Study session summary. So far in this lecture, we have attempted an assessment of Carl Hempel's deductive nomological model of scientific explanation. We started with a brief explanation of the meaning of model and then proceeds to explain Carl Hempel's deductive nomological model. This was followed by an evaluation of Hempel's model by way of critique. The conclusion drawn is that Hempel's model is not an adequate explanatory model for explaining social facts, owing to their interdependency and unpredictability, as well as the complexities of the human person from whom all social facts emanate. End of study session 7. Thank you for listening.